Welcome back to the Bruce Poinsette Show. If you're familiar with this B block, you're probably familiar with the segment we do every now and then called Hotep or Ferengi,
Woo!
which is inspired by a certain section of the Black Manosphere that's become more pronounced, at least in the media or social media spaces anyway, in the last few years. And a lot of that was spurred by a man by the name of Kevin Samuels. So, he got really famous for coining the phrase, we'll say, of high value man. What makes a high value man?
Yes.
And as you may have heard, Kevin Samuels recently passed the age of 50 something. And, while my first inclination was, oh, we got to do a Hotep or Ferengi because this is, a moment when the avatar
Yeah.
for the Hotep side of that and kind of the Ferengi side of that, has passed. But we also, like, I don't necessarily believe in karma, but not really big on just like, really going in and making fun of the dead. These people do have families, and just in general, again,
Yeah.
the energy you put out there is the energy you get back. I just said I don't believe in karma, and that probably contradicts all of that. Anyways, that said, I do want to have a little bit of a discussion. We are both Black men, and there's been a lot of discussion online about the influence of the Black Manosphere.
Yes.
So a number of creators, I think we both follow, like FD Signifier, for example, more popular video essayists on YouTube right now, has been doing a series kind of dissecting the manosphere. Kim Foster, who runs For Harriet, has been doing a number of discussions, not just on the manosphere, but specifically on this idea of, is the manosphere as influential as we say it is, or is it being inflated by the reaction to it, specifically from sort of feminist thinkers on the internet? And, again, as two Black men who I don't think either one of us are. Were you a big Kevin Samuels watcher?
Not at all, no.
No, me neither. I don't watch Kevin Samuels. I don't watch. We're not gonna. I was about to name off and rattle off some people, but they don't need free promotion.
Yeah.
But what I will say though is that this idea that it's just a fringe thing and it's only being talked about because people are reacting to it, I don't think that's true.
No, that is not true.
We definitely come across people, some of them are more, overt, very, very Hotep-y, but then other people you wouldn't necessarily expect.
Subtle. It's much more subtle.
Who are definitely like, they're following all this content, they're keeping up with it, even if they're like, well, the line some version of the line you hear is like, well, it does have some points. Kevin Samuels does have some points, and he's just being honest with these people. Why do you have a problem with him being honest with people? And it's like,
always awkward, always rough. Yep.
This whole, if honesty is just talking about basically like a woman has this place, if you're trying to attract this woman and you're trying to do all these things as a man, you better hit these, you better be making this much money.
Yeah.
You better be doing this, that, and to be fair, like, he got a lot of attention for how he put down Black women, and all that criticism is deserved. But also, he was an equal opportunity offender in just ruining Black men as well.
Yes.
He really covered the basis of Black men and women and tearing down collective self-esteem. So, good on him for that legacy, I guess. And there are plenty following or people who, paved the way before him, or still very much chugging along today. But that said, I do think it is interesting to explore this idea of like, is the influence as big as we say it is? Because there are reasons why this content is popular.
Mm-hmm.
From the standpoint of the algorithm, it's just it causes an emotional reaction,
Mm-hmm.
and obviously, like the algorithm boosts things that you have a very visceral reaction to, anger especially. So things that are causing debate, things that piss you off, yeah, the algorithm is probably going to boost that.
Yes.
Things that denigrate minority groups, for some reason the algorithm has a way of pushing that.
Yes.
Like sexism, homophobia, racism,
Transphobia, the whole
transphobia. Yeah.
360.
But then also, if we're being real, like one of the things that these like manosphere people are speaking to is the fact that society does reward certain performances of masculinity.
Yes.
Like physical appearance, how much money you're making,
Mm-hmm.
Your ability to quote unquote dominate in spaces. Whether we like to admit it or not, we do reward that in society.
We do.
We reward
Absolutely.
that in men. Your ability, like if you are looking for a mate, especially if you're, a straight man looking for a woman, like we have kind of set that up in a way where it's like we do reward that or we do validate these notions. So if you're a guy and you're feeling like, you are not getting everything the world is rewarding you, and especially during this time where, in addition to like those social constructs, there's also just the economic factor where a lot of people are struggling.
Yeah.
Like stuff like Kevin Samuels and this manosphere stuff, the same way I shouldn't say this manosphere, but like the black manosphere speaks to people the same way the larger, manosphere and particularly the white manosphere speaks to people in the same way it's
Yes.
radicalizing a lot of white men and boys out here to be just the worst. Like that is very much tied to the fact that people are struggling out here.
Yeah.
And when they're struggling, again, they gravitate towards those things that can scapegoat people and say, it's not your fault. It's these women's fault. It's society's fault. It's the minorities who are taking your jobs and your opportunities. Obviously, it's still worrisome because, again,
yeah,
it feels pretty transparent, but it is getting a lot of people. And it is, we use this word radicalizing, but I look at it especially from a standpoint of just, again, as black men, like people I know who don't watch that stuff, but if we're having a talk and they start seeming to repeat or at least like start alluding to those lines about, what a black man should be, or taking a step further, like, taking like the way people talk about school curriculum or like limiting, expression in school or like feeling like I'm not the too much too fast stuff in school from people who you would think are like otherwise progressive.
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I'm seeing the intersections. Like it's not just the black man lace. I'm seeing how like a bunch of like Tucker Carlson, Fox News type stuff is also kind of like coming through that pipeline to you. And it's like, what do we do about this? Because it's one thing to just look at it and say, that's them over there. I don't watch that. So what does it matter? But it's clearly affecting people. It's clearly playing on, established tropes and ideas. And if nothing else, just from like a selfish standpoint, like the way women, non-binary people in particular see me as a black man ends up being also shaped by these people's like outsized influence in society. Like, I don't know about you, but do you feel like when you go out now, like you got to be like, I got to put on for black men that much more because Otherwise, people are just gonna assume I'm,
one of the it.
yeah.
It's so difficult because I think in it's really interesting because like I feel like I've noticed the manosphere conversation more recently more than I have ever in my life, but I think it's existed for a long period, if not all of my life, like the concept of the manosphere. And I think what's really difficult, especially when it comes to the topic of Black men, is that we are already viewed as aggressive and angry figures and hard headed figures in society. So when the negative connotation of now you have Black men in media looking super ignorant and being super unaccepting, and you have a lot of Black men who are following this, like so many Black men refuse to acknowledge trans lives in general. Like so many Black men are still extremely homophobic. Even like it was really interesting. I don't know how this crossed over to you. I'm a believer of like a lot of people in communities. I'm gonna listen to the community and how they feel about issues. And I don't know if you listened to the recent Kendrick Lamar issue or album, but his use of the F word on the album made a lot of people in the queer community uncomfortable. I don't think anyone was trying to cancel Kendrick Lamar, but I noticed a lot of like, especially Black men being like, nah, but this wasn't for you, like this was made for us, da 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 da. And it's like, but you're not the ones who are made uncomfortable by this moment. It's not your job to be uncomfortable. It is as of our job. Again, and like that's like again, no one's trying to cancel Kendrick. We still love Kendrick, but I think in that when those are the images that are being seen from the mass majority of public Black figures and like all of that, I think yeah, it does kind of make it difficult to move around, or like I feel to even be viewed as a comfortable figure for people around me. And this is as someone who has a lot of queer people in my life and all of that. Like I think I do feel like I have to do not extra because I don't think it's being extra, but I do think that it's like I have to be very aware of like how I'm moving because like of these people and these figures who are doing insane, crazy shit around us.
Oh, that's right though. Like in a lot of cases, you see this, and part of this also this manosphere reaction is just to having to acknowledge, especially like queer people,
Mm-hmm.
in a way that you didn't have to do like in the 90s, or at least like publicly
Yeah.
anyway. And you see this pushback, you see just like this is like vitriol and like not even very low key hatred. And like it's one thing for us to like look at like a Kevin Samuels or these other commentators and be like, oh, that's just this corner of the internet over here, or whatever. But yeah, like you said, we start talking about Kendrick Lamar.
Mm-hmm.
We start talking about more, I think more like even like overt just expressions of transphobia with like a Dave Chappelle or someone
Yes.
like it's very, very much mainstream figures putting out stuff that, a lot of people are consuming. I mean, I got into, as we, talk about Bruce's stories here. It's like I got into a little argument with a friend of mine, with a trans friend of mine, over the Dave Chappelle special.
Mm-hmm.
Not over like I wasn't defending Dave, but just over my choice like to watch it. Period.
Yeah.
And I understood their point of saying like, okay, you're hearing these things about the special, so why are you going to watch it?
Mm-hmm.
And my stance at the time was like, okay, like I just want to know what is actually, I want this in like context, and I want to know what's being said. And
Yeah.
I watched it and I was like, yikes.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one point for those who haven't seen the closer, there's a point where Dave brings up North Carolina's like trans exclusion laws with like, or like banning trans people from like the bathroom laws. And he's actually trying to make a point about how like it's a mean spirited law,
Mm-hmm.
but someone in the audience is like, as soon as he mentions the law, like starts like cheering for it. And he has a moment, he has to pause and be like, no, 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 it's a mean law, something like that, right?
Yeah.
And it's like an obvious parallel for the story he talks about of why he quit the Chappelle show, where
Yes.
he talks about, doing this blackface pixie skit and someone laughing the wrong way and him just feeling uncomfortable. But in this moment with the closer, like he acknowledges, hey, no, you're laughing at the wrong thing, but then continues on and is very much since double, triple, quadruple down.
Yes.
Like
On
even to the
his
point
point.
where he got attacked by a person on stage who ended up
Mm-hmm.
having like, I think it was actually like a knife, legitimately. Like didn't pull it out on him, but like legitimately like tackled him, attacked him, and they whooped that guy's. But
Yeah.
that's another story.
That's
But I what I didn't hear, and I found out in a clip later, is like when he got up from that, the first thing he says is like something along the lines of, I think a trans person tried to attack me. And it's like, wow, wow, we are
uh
like, what are we doing
right.
here? It's just all this stuff that, again, we're like doubling and tripling down
Mm-hmm.
on just the most, some of the more like overtly like bigoted views and just these things that, again, have been, tropes, to be fair, of what we just define as traditional masculinity and really
Yes.
hyper masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do about that when it's, because again, like we talked about earlier, it's kind of it's held a traditional space in pop culture, and the algorithm definitely boosts that type of content because of how it affects people's emotions and
Yeah.
what kind of engagement it draws. But as black men who I'd like to think are trying to do better
Mm-hmm.
in this world, like what is the response to that? Because like we can make, more thoughtful con- content out here, and there are obviously people, we mentioned FD Signify
Yeah.
earlier, we're doing this and getting numbers for it. But for the most part, the market is not designed to boost you if you do this.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people, they're going to write you off as just trying to be, too woke or all this other
Mm-hmm.
stuff, trying to do this. At the same time, like we do have an obligation, not just from a media standpoint, but, if you do any, work with students,
Mm-hmm.
you're going here, looking at middle schoolers and high schoolers and thinking, okay, they're watching what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make sure this stuff is imparted and it's not just, imparted through like the language they put in, a school manual or something, like this is how we're going to do, and we're going to do an assembly on this. But like how do we model being better humans in a real way,
Mm.
both in the media and in life, in a world where this type of content, this manosphere content, is so outsized and so designed to be outsized in the
Right.
media landscape. Like I wish I had the
That
answers.
is, yeah. You have asked, I think, one of the most interesting questions, because I think in a larger sense, and this, I guess this is kind of a counter question to your question.
Mhm.
How have you dealt with you might have friends, family, people, etc., who are regurgitating these thought points and these think points that align with the manosphere or even hypermasculinity. And I think even in a space even beyond media, it's like when I have people who are refusing to back down on issues, whether it be towards transphobia or anything of the sorts, homophobia, all of these issues, when you have a lot of men and black men in particular who are kind of refusing to back down on their thoughts, it's like how do you like, I feel like that's where like it starts with
Mhm.
people around us, but when the whole goal of the manosphere and of hypermasculinity is to be finite and final in their thoughts. How do you then? Obviously, you might not be able to change their mind. How do you then? Like, what do you do?
Like, I'm not gonna sit here and say, "Ooh, I've converted people to common decency.
Mm-hmm.
Let me show you how." But I will say, as far as like an approach, I've kind of tried to take the long game approach to it,
Mhm.
for better or worse. And it's not always the most satisfying answer to people.
Right.
But I think in one case, I think relationships are important in
Yeah.
terms of like it can't just be a oh, I disagree with you and we're going to have a debate where my goal is to shut you down and then move on
Hmm.
because no one actually kind of like takes stuff from that. Like I think there's obviously value in debate. But like if you don't have like a relationship or trust with someone where you're actually dialoguing and discoursing and trying to like grow with each other,
Hmm.
then it's just like you're talking at each other to a point and oftentimes in a way where you're just performing either for people reading a comment thread or
Right.
if you're actually doing this out loud for the people at your dinner table or on the street watching you.
Yes.
And so, like I said, it's just, it becomes more of a performance and an attempt to, ironically, even if you're trying to like push something or push back against hypermasculinity, you end up trying to dominate someone to do it,
Bingo.
which reinforces,
Hmm.
like, subtly reinforces a lot of the things you're trying to tear down. So, part of it is, again, having, relationships with people. Like, you can't necessarily, it may not work with like a stranger, but those people who are actually in your life, having conversations, asking questions to some extent, to like have someone, you know, I want to credit a friend of mine who like he's really good at asking questions in the point and getting someone to kind of like go through like when they say something problematic to kind of like actually follow the logical through line
Mm.
of that thought and get them to a point where it's like, oh yeah, that is messed up, I
What's up?
guess. And there's a skill to that. Like
Yes,
I'm
absolutely.
not as good as he is at it, but there's a way to do that. But then I think also just when I look at, what am I trying to do with other people? It's also a level to me. It's like, what's helped me kind of get to a better place? And
Mm.
part of it is just, seeking out community and being in community with different people. And
Yeah.
especially like we're talking about, you know, homophobia, transphobia, misogyny,
Hmm.
making sure, you're in community with women, in community with non-binary people, like not just, I'm seeking you out to study you like some science experiment or something, like actually just in
Creating
genuine community,
relationships.
building actual relationships
Yeah,
with people. Like, and that takes time.
that does.
Like it does. And then also, this isn't a shortcut, but it is something that is out there. Like there are so many creators
Yeah.
just in the media landscape who are they are giving you so much of the information you are seeking out for free.
Hmm.
Like you get
YouTube has many people.
between YouTube and podcasts, you could seek out and not even just like overtly political either.
Hmm.
Like I can't tell you how much I've probably learned about women and probably in particular just from like listening to nerd podcasts that happen to be, you know, led by women where
Yes.
like they're talking about, they might be talking about the writing on Young Justice on one thing, but they're also like in all these shows, people talk about life and they talk about
Yes.
these things and relationships come up and, you know, because men and particularly straight men out here are going wild.
Hmm.
The things we do and the ways we traumatize people come up
A
in
lot.
conversations very
Quite
often.
often.
So it's not hard to like get some perspective out here and just and in a way that is on your time
Hmm.
and without having to re-traumatize someone,
Right.
pouring through them. And again, it's all out there. There is something for you. Some whatever angle, whatever foot gets you in the door is out there. You can sit there and just listen and watch.
Yeah.
But then also, again, I encourage people to build community because part of part of my inclination is to like look at it from a media standpoint be like, well, what can we put on screen to change these things? But the reality is, we're trying to change a way of thinking. We're trying to change a
Yeah.
way of how we're socialized. So it goes deeper, and it means solutions that are long, solutions that are, like I said,
Time consuming.
exactly, time consuming, emotionally challenging,
Mm,
things that are really going to make you grow, and you may not see it until 5 years later. If we're being real,
yeah.
but considering the scope of the problem, I'd say these actions are also necessary.
Agreed. 100%.